All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the channel. Captain Cody Davis hanging out with you guys again, as always. And just wanted to take a little bit of time today to shoot a video on a bait slash technique that I've been getting asked about a ton really over the last, I guess it's really over the last year or so. And that is the big Zara Spook that I throw out here on Lake Okeechobee. Now, keep this in mind. This is the one that I throw and kind of my confidence deal. But any big walking style bait will work. There's a million companies that make them. This just happens to be the one that I like. This has kind of become the famous spook in my boat. It's weird that when customers get in and they see this either laying in the cup holder or on one of the rods or two of the rods rigged up in the boat, this is like what they gravitate to. And I always think it's funny because a spook is something that I just recently, when it comes down to it, started getting familiar, confident with, and started catching a lot of big fish on. I've thrown them my whole life, but it's just until about a couple of years ago to where I actually started fishing this bait. And what I mean by that is we all come into those scenarios where you find schooling fish that are up top blowing up on shad, and it's always fun to throw a topwater bait in there and catch them. The difference is then you're more or less throwing the bait, hitting in the school, and working the bait as fast as humanly possible, trying to make it look like a fleeing or injured shad, and the fish come up and bite. But in that scenario, you know where the fish are at, you know they're active, you know they're feeding, you know what they want, and you just throw it in there and you get to see the strike. When I run into that scenario out here on Lake Okeechobee, a lot of you guys might notice in my videos, this really isn't the bait that I tend to throw. A lot of times when they're schooling out here, they're schooling on a little bit smaller shad. So I'll throw like a pencil popper style bait. Arc makes one that I really like, or there's a ton of different companies that make them. Essentially, it's just a smaller topwater. It's weighted to the back, so you could throw it a country mile. And it's got a little bit more of a subtle action on top. Doesn't spit or chug as much water or anything, which is fine. You don't need to call fish in from a long ways with that bait because you're throwing it to right where you know they're at and feeding. Whereas with this, you're more or less blind casting around, throwing it to even possibly some bedding fish or fish that are just laid up against the reeds or in submerged grass on the bottom. And when I mean fishing it, I mean working it at a slower cadence, maybe an aggressive cadence, maybe not, but keeping the bait in the water for a lot longer period of time. And you're trying to call fish from either right below the bait and even trying to, agitate them and piss them off in some cases, or you're trying to pull them in from a long ways away to come and eat this bait. And the way that I even got into throwing this deal, like I said, I always had some walking baits and stuff, and I did throw them from time to time. But I got sick and tired of running shiner trips with customers, pulling up on a mat line and or a reed head, throwing big wild shiners up there, and catching all the 4 to 7 and 8 pounders that you wanted throughout the day or really throughout the course of the week, and then going back out there with artificials and trying to punch the mats that we were pulling the fish out of, trying to swim a worm down the side of it, throw a frog to the edge of it, whatever it might be, and having absolutely no success. I always joke, for some reason you can't catch shiner fish on artificial and you can't catch artificial fish on shiners. It's just the way that they set up. But in an effort to try and catch those fish on artificial, I thought maybe a big spook style bait, throwing it up on the edge of whatever it might be we were shiner fishing on the windblown side, walking that bait aggressively just out from it and letting the wind kind of blow it up to the edge and working it back out. So that way it looks like the same injured or frantic shiner that we're throwing up there. And it also will call the fish out. They don't get a really good look at the bait because it's up top. Things like that. And did that work? Kinda. It didn't work as great as I would have liked it to, but I did catch some fish doing that. So I had a bunch of these. Basically, it's a gold with a mustard colored belly Zara Spook. I thought it kind of matched a golden shiner pretty well. And I had them in the boat, and it was, a month or so later, I was fishing an area of the lake where we were crushing the big ones on popping frogs. Everyone knows about the popping frog phenomenon that's going down here on Lake Okeechobee over the last 5-6 years. but we were in a very crowded area. So in an effort to try to show them something different, maybe a little bit more subtle when it comes down to it, I had a spook tied on. And while my guys were throwing popping frogs, and catching fish, I fired the spook out there and caught one, around 9 pounds. So that gave me a lot of confidence in the bait. And I just started playing with it. That's how I tell people to get good at something. I mean, as much as I want you to watch my videos, the videos just, I don't know, maybe tip you off to something, but just go fish it. And then it came down to it where, like I said, people call this like the famous spook now, and it's something that I don't even consider myself good at. It's just something I have confidence in now. And I just kind of recently started throwing it, but I catch a lot of big fish and a lot of fish in general on this bait. And one of the biggest secrets to it is just you got to throw it. You just got to keep throwing it. And I think, anyone you ask on the lake, whether there's a guy who's really good at throwing a frog, really good at catching them out of the mats, really good at flipping a jig, really good at throwing a worm, when you ask them, like, what's your secret to doing it, they say you just got to throw it. I mean, the longer you'll have something in your hand and throw it, not only are the better you're going to get with it, but you're going to, increase your odds at catching a lot and big fish on it as well. And this isn't something I throw all the time. Obviously, the conditions have to call for it, but this gets to be about the time where you can have some really good days with this bait, and it's something you just got to throw. But the main purpose of this video is to show you guys something a little different I've been doing, and I'll kind of talk about my setup that I throw it on. I think I've already done a video on it, but we'll just keep it honest here. So I've got a 7'1". This is a medium heavy rod. This is an arc reinforcer 7'1". If I'm being 100% honest with you guys, they make this rod in a medium. I think I'm going to go to the medium. I like, when I'm throwing a treble hooked bait like this, I like something that bends a lot. When you're twitching that bait, that little bit looser tip enables that bait to walk more aggressively without kind of making it skip towards the boat. You can make it walk in place a lot easier. You can get it to kind of, in a weird way, go side to side, a little bit further each direction with a softer rod. And you just don't pull as many hooks. So I wanted the medium heavy, but I think I'm going to go to the medium. But it's user preference, whatever works for you. 40 or 50 pound braid is what I throw it on. This has 40 on it right now. I think I like it a little more. It's a little, obviously it's a thinner diameter, and I feel like that just helps the bait walk a lot easier, whatnot. I used to run a little piece of 25 pound mono on there. I don't do that anymore. I don't like any weak points in my line if I can help it. So just running it straight to the eye of the hook. I obviously put those little bobber stops on there just to try and keep that line out in front of that bait, so it doesn't get wrapped in the O-rings or in the treble hooks here, which will happen a lot with this tip that I'm going to be giving you guys. I tie a uni knot. This one I didn't do a ton of wraps, but sometimes I'll try to do like 30 wraps in my uni knot so that the knot almost comes out 1.5 inches from the bait. So you do that along with 2 or 3 bobber stops, and you got a good gap of braid out in front of your front treble on your bait. Okay, so it keeps it from getting fouled up. It doesn't inhibit the action of the bait whatsoever that I've found. And there was something else I was just going to say. Bobber stop. Anyway, I don't remember. Uni knot, bobber stop. You're good to go. Now, here's the deal, guys. This is kind of what caused me to do this. A lot of you know, this is probably what I was going to say. I don't run the center hook on my topwater. And there's a couple reasons for that. Again, I've done videos on it before, so if any of you that have watched it, I won't bore you to death with the details, but I'm a big fan or a big believer that sometimes less is more. And what it seemed like to me is, with this treble hook being here, will you hook more fish that bite? Yes. Okay. But I don't want to hook them I want to land them. And if you're fishing in a 30, 40, 50 foot lake, you're on a river lake or something along those lines where you don't have a lot of cover for them to get you in, absolutely. You could throw this on super light line. You could baby them, take your time with them, and 3 hooks is not an issue. But when we're down here in Lake Okeechobee and 10 feet to your left, you've got a cattail head, 2 feet to your right, you've got dollar pads, you've got cattail stubble underneath the water, you've got Kissimmee grass, whatever it might be. You can't really baby them. So what happens is, and I've said this before, I feel like you will hook them, but sometimes that center hook will just get in the way. Or maybe it'd be the back hook in that case getting in the way of the center hook, or vice versa. But there's just so many hooks that sometimes I feel like they'll come up to hit it and they might get fouled or poked on their way up, and they actually don't get to actually eat the bait. They more or less pull away from it. They might get foul hooked for a second, the side of the head, the top of the head, the fin, the tail, or even the mouth. But they didn't get a whole mouthful or a big bite of that hook, and they'll pull off, especially a big one. Or maybe they're on there, but they run you into the grass and they come off. Whereas with these, if you do this, I've had them beat this bait to death and not get hooked. Them blowing it out of the water and stuff, that's fine. 9 times out of 10, that fish is committed to that bait. So until he either eats it or he gets hooked, good, he's going to continue to beat this bait up. So I'd rather him come up and hit it out of the water and not get hooked 3 times, but then come up the 4th time and just either eat the bait head first and get a big bunch of, big treble hook in his mouth, or just a clean hook in the back, come up and eat the back of the bait and get this whole treble hook in his mouth. Then I want him get hooked on the first strike, but he's hooked in the eye, or he's barely hooked in the lip and ends up pulling off. See what I'm saying? So I use these 2 hooks. I upsize the treble hooks. And I've done something a little bit different. This is kind of the point of this video. So I was using just like the Kevin Van Dam triple grip treble hook and whatnot. The problem I was having, and it goes back to the condition of the lake, we're fishing, and it's no secret, we're fishing around a lot of dead or dying vegetation right now. So primarily cattails. And what's happening is these cattails are dying off, sinking to the bottom. The remnants are still kind of there. We call it stubble, these old sticks and stuff. And what's happening is you're hooking these big fish, and of course they're running through this stuff. And a couple of things are happening. Either let's just say you hook a 7-pounder on this back hook. I'd rather have 1 treble hook exposed to snag on debris underwater than 2. You got a better chance at this hook ripping out of the stubble or the cattail and you landing your fish, as opposed to there being 2 in there that, are really gripped in. But what's happening is between these getting stuck is you're fighting the fish. You're having to put a decent amount of pressure on these fish. And I'm opening these treble hooks up, these 1X style treble hooks we traditionally throw. Not opening them up entirely, but enough to where, like, after a few fish, it's like, oh, that one got snagged on something, and your hooks look all leaky wonky. You don't really want to bend them back. So I just changed the hooks out. I went to these are Gamakatsu makes them. Mustad owner probably makes a line like this too, but they're the EWG short shank 2X strong magic eye treble hooks. Okay, now you might notice they are very, very short, but they're a thicker gauged hook. I mean, you can open up everything, but these are thick. So what that enables me to do is put a lot of pressure on these fish to get them out of the stuff. Now, you might have heard me say this, they're short shank. So in an effort to kind of make these baits hang a little lower to get a better hookup ratio, what I do is I put 2 split rings on there. You can see that one on the front and on the back. I double up the split rings. This enables the hooks to hang a little lower. It also gives the hooks some more room to spin and have more wiggle room and freedom. So as opposed to if a fish does a roll or something and the hook stops spinning, especially if the fish is hung up in some thick vegetation underneath, the hook will rip out. This enables them to jump. There's a lot more play in the hook, which I like. The other good thing about upsizing these hooks, these are number 2s, and you technically could go to number 1s, is that's a bigger gap in that hook. Okay, there's more bite to the fish, which, you know, for years you see these guys on TV and they're doing it right. I'm not saying they're doing it wrong, but when you hook a fish on a treble hook, you have to kind of baby them. You got those small trebles, they don't have a lot of meat, and you have to baby them around. Well, you just can't do that on this lake right now in a lot of the areas we're fishing, because they're going to dive straight down into that junk. Again, what's the whole thing? When they come up, when they eat a treble hook bait, it's keep your rod down. Don't let them jump to throw that hook. It's the complete opposite in these areas. As soon as they eat this spook, they eat a rattle trap, a square bill, I have my rod straight in the air, trying to keep their head up out of all this junk that's underneath the water. And you could put a lot of pressure on the fish with these wider gap treble hooks. I'm fishing, like I said, 40 or 50 pound braid, and it's for the most part locked up. It's pretty tight. You got to put a lot of pressure on them. Will you pull some hooks? You will, but in my opinion, I just feel like they're going to come off one way or the other. Either you're going to pull the hook, which I think with these hooks, you're going to not pull as many hooks, or they're going to get you down in those dead or dying cattails, get hung up, and they're going to, something's going to give, and usually it's their lips to begin with. But that's it. I've been throwing this one and a bone white one because we've had a lot of shad. But it's funny, every time I try to throw a shad pattern spook around lots of shad, this particular one outfishes them. I don't know if it's a confidence thing. I have confidence in white, but this deal right here, this exact bait, this is just a Hayden saltwater super spook. I don't know. I catch the fire out of them on it, and I have for the last few years. But definitely give that a shot. Upsize those hooks. Add that split ring. That made a big difference. I thought it might inhibit the action because it's more drag on the bait. I can't notice a difference at all. And again, don't be afraid to crank that drag down and pull on them, especially if you've got a rod that has a really good bend to it. Again, you guys heard me say I kind of want to go to that medium. I do. You don't have to. You don't need a stiff rod for this presentation. You're not trying to pull the fish. You're not trying to pull the hook through plastic, as in like if you were flipping or anything like that. You're not trying to pull them out of matted vegetation. You're just trying to keep their head up from getting down in the stuff. So you're already directly to the fish, and having a rod that loads, that's your drag more or less, So I think I'm going to go to the medium, but whatever works for you is best, whatever you feel comfortable with. And take this guy out as long as the water is over 62 degrees. If you have clouds, that greatly increases your odds. Put it in your hand and throw it. It's a big fish catcher. You will catch numbers, but primarily if you get a bite on this spook, it's usually one that you want to put in the live well for the end of the day. And that's it. Give it a shot. So that's it. I appreciate you guys watching. I'm going to go finish my house chores here, and I guess I will see you guys on the next one.